This is the BBC. For details of our complete range of programmes, go to bbcworldservice.com/podcasts.
Welcome to the latest global news, compiled in the early hours of the morning on Saturday, the 10th of February. I'm Emilio Sampedro with a selection of highlights from across BBC World Service News today. Coming up, peace breaks out on the Korean Peninsula for the duration of the Winter Olympics at least, and the United States is not pleased. As Syrian and Russian warplanes pound a rebel-held district outside Damascus for the fifth day running, a senior UN humanitarian official tells us it's time for all parties to the conflict to allow in aid.
Our appeal is for all sides, first of all, to respect international humanitarian law, to respect human rights law, to respect the basic rules of war, which should not affect civilians.
Also in the podcast, the French Muslim singer who's quit a TV talent show amid a row over online posts. And later,
Hi there, I'm Romeo, a Sehuencas water frog from Bolivia. I'm here to find my match, just like you.
the desperate search for a mate for the last of a species of Bolivian water frog. That's right. But first, it's the opening day at the Winter Olympics in Pyeongchang. Ski jumping, curling, and speed skating are all part of the lineup, and later, Olympic history will be made with the first unified Korean women's team taking on Switzerland in ice hockey. The events follow an historic opening ceremony. Competitors from North and South Korea marched together under a flag of unity, and the North Korean leader's sister, Kim Yo-jung, was also among the crowd. However, not everyone was pleased with this thaw in relations. The U.S. Vice President Mike Pence cut short his attendance at an official dinner where he would have been sitting at the same table as the North's ceremonial leader. Here's the BBC's Stephen McDonnell.
Just months ago, who would have thought that the North Koreans would even attend the Winter Olympics, let alone have a joint hockey team for the North and South Korean teams to march in together with this unification flag, for the North Korean leader's sister to be there in the stadium. I mean, absolutely incredible. History in the making.
Yeah, very dramatic scenes, but not everyone's pleased.
No, well, I don't know that Mike Pence, the US Vice President, would have been too happy about it. He vowed to challenge North Korea at every stage, and he ended up sitting in the stadium one row in front of Kim Yo-jong, the North Korean leader's sister, like within handshake distance. And you saw the look on his face. He looked not so enthusiastic about that seating arrangement, I have to say. In terms of the crowd response, when those athletes came in together and they all cheered. Now, it's not to overplay it, but after so many threats, so many months and years of tension and virtually no communication, people are quite impressed that the Olympic Games has provided this opportunity for a different path.
So it's a big coup for the Olympic Games. It's a sign of some kind of friendship or renewed friendship between the two, but presumably there will be some in South Korea who will be feeling a bit like Mike Pence about this.
Oh, absolutely. Opinions totally divided in South Korea about this, especially amongst the older generation. There is clear division within the community in South Korea over this. Those who are in favour of engagement would say President Moon Jae-in, he came to power here promising to have some greater dialogue, at least try and build some sort of bridges with North Korea. He could say, I've got a mandate for that kind of communications. There are images of him in the stadium turning around to the North Korean delegation behind him and shaking hands with North Korea's official head of state. He'll be criticised for doing it.
Is there a sense that the U.S. may start looking differently at Moon Jae-in, may see him as a less reliable interlocutor or partner?
Well, it's been a difficult relationship ever since Moon Jae-in came to power, really. They've got a different opinion on how to deal with North Korea, absolutely. They do still seem to be able to work it out because fundamentally it's just that the government in South Korea wants to attempt to have some sort of dialogue.
Stephen McDonnell. Government planes have targeted eastern Ghouta near the Syrian capital Damascus for the fifth day running. It's despite renewed calls for an end to the fighting. The rebel-held suburb is under siege and running short of food, water, and medical supplies. At least 200 people have died during the government air offensive. France has urged Russia, which backs the Syrian government, to call on Damascus to halt its action. But on Thursday, at a UN Security Council meeting, Moscow dismissed calls for a truce as unrealistic. In a moment, we'll hear from a UN Assistant Secretary General about that rebuff. But first, let's hear from Yusuf Ibrahim. He's a teacher with a family living in the town of Harasta in eastern Ghouta.
We've never ever seen such intense, heavy bombardments before. They use chemical, heavy surface-to-surface missiles, warplanes, mortars. Every kind of weapons are being used. We expect warplanes to bomb, never stops bombing. Between each 5 minutes, we expect that warplanes will come and bomb the safe houses. Not all people and civilians can protect themselves.
Panos Mumsis is a UN Assistant Secretary General and Regional Humanitarian Coordinator for Syria. He's been speaking to the BBC's Julian Marshall.
The impact on Eastern Ghouta is quite dramatic. It's really an extreme situation what is happening. 400,000 people are really living in a very difficult condition. So we have about 700 medical cases that are in need of an urgent medical evacuation. This is women, children. East Ghouta is really like 30 minutes outside Damascus. You drive to a suburb. And these people have been living under extremely difficult conditions. The besiegement, no humanitarian assistance also going inside. We have, the last time we brought in humanitarian assistance to East Ghouta was on the 10th of December. And people are suffering. There's been a significant number of casualties. The protection of civilians clearly is not respected, which is a requirement with international humanitarian law. Health facilities also have been attacked. Schools have been attacked. So it's an extremely difficult situation for people there.
And what are the Syrian government and its Russian allies trying to do? Are they trying to bomb eastern Ghouta into submission?
Well, whatever is happening on the military front is having an extreme impact on people's lives inside. So for us, this is really what has led us to this call for a humanitarian pause, for a ceasefire. We're calling for an urgent and immediate ceasefire for 30 days to allow us to bring in humanitarian assistance, to take out medical evacuations, and to really bring some kind of relief to the people in this location.
But that appeal has already been rebuffed by Russia, has it not?
This appeal is being discussed. Our sense and frustration is that at the moment we have a total failure of humanitarian diplomacy. Every effort that has been made has not brought any results.
But is the onus simply on the Syrian government and its allies to stop fighting? What about the rebels? Because again, the pattern of this conflict has been rebels mixing in with the civilian population. I mean, that's what's happening in eastern Ghouta at the moment. It's what happened in Aleppo 2 years ago. What appeals are you making to them?
Clearly, there's nobody who is innocent on this conflict, and our appeal is really to all sides to allow a humanitarian ceasefire, to allow us to bring in assistance. Besiegement takes from both sides. There's 1,200 communities that are in what we call hard to reach, because really it's impossible to go to these locations. So our appeal is for all sides, first of all, to respect international humanitarian law, to respect human rights law, to respect the basic rules of war, which should not affect civilians.
Panos Mumsis is the UN's Regional Humanitarian Coordinator for the Syria crisis. Now, she was an unknown, young, beautiful Muslim singer who suddenly shot to fame following her performance on France's TV talent show, The Voice. The video of 22-year-old Menal Ibtisam singing Leonard Cohen's Hallelujah went viral, but soon afterwards, comments emerged online which showed that she had expressed doubts about the terrorist nature of the 2016 Nice lorry attack. She's now been forced to quit the TV show. Hugh Schofield is in Paris and explains the controversy.
She gave this rave performance, and all four of the judges were bowled over by her. She had this sort of innocent, delicate voice and presence, and she sang a little bit in English and then in Arab. She went through to the next round. She was going to be trained by Mika, the French pop star, to go further in the competition. But then it all came out, and this was on Facebook, and it was revealed that she'd made these posts at the time of some of the big attacks in 2016, in particular after the Nice attack. You remember when all those people were run over by the lorry and killed? She said something on the lines of, "Oh, isn't it funny, another terrorist attack, and conveniently they leave their ID papers in the lorry," i.e. this probably wasn't a terrorist attack at all. And then a few days later, when there was the killing of the priest near Rouen, she had on Facebook a message which included the line, "The real terrorists are the French government." So obviously, an almighty row broke out at this point. She apologised, posted a video of herself saying, this was me in my younger days, and of course I have nothing but contempt for terrorists. But, that was not enough, and she's been removed from the show. And from her fans' point of view, it's a great shame because she was clearly going places.
What's been the reaction?
And there are people who are saying, hang on a sec, it's not fair. This was the far right were out to get her and dug up these tweets. It's all a big plot against her. But I suspect the majority feeling is, hang on a sec. What she said was maybe naive, but it betrayed also a kind of mentality which believes that it was all a big plot, that these terrorist attacks never happened, or they weren't the work of terrorists. And, in today's world, in today's France, that wasn't going to hold water. It's, of course, part of this whole question over our digital legacy and whether things we've said in the past can be brought back and what they tell us about our current selves. She's saying, well, this is all meaningless. This was me back then and this is now. But, others are saying, well, it was only 2 years ago. You're 22 now. You were 20 then. You also put likes on your Facebook page towards Dieudonné, who's the very, very controversial, some would say anti-Semitic comic. She likes Tariq Ramadan, the Islamic scholar who's now in trouble over rape allegations, though she wasn't referring to that, but more to his teachings. She comes across on Facebook, at least in this part of her Facebook presence, as someone who has a kind of conspiratorial, anti-Islamophobe view of the world. I'm afraid in this day and age, she was dead in the water.
Hugh Schofield. Now to Rio de Janeiro, where its world-famous Carnival kicks off this weekend. But behind the lively music, flamboyant costumes and dance, this year's event has been fraught with controversy. The city's government made the decision to cut the grants to the leading samba schools, making it hard for them to keep on schedule with their elaborate floats. As a result, the theme of the parade is likely to be very political. Our South America correspondent Katie Watson now reports from Rio de Janeiro.
In Rio's Samba City, schools are working around the clock to get their floats ready for the weekend's parade. This year, though, it's been tough after Rio's mayor Marcelo Crivella cut government funding for the schools by nearly half, blaming financial struggles.
O conceito geral do enredo, ele usa dessa coisa mais escrachada, desse visual mais popular.
Leandro Vieira is the artistic director of Mangueira Samba School. Walking through golden cherubs, ballet dancers and laughing jesters, he talks me through their parade, which they've called With Money or Without Money, I'll Play. He won't show us many of the set pieces, that's a secret until the big day, but did explain that this year's plot is a deliberate attempt to ridicule the mayor's decision, one that many critics blame on his conservative religious beliefs.
It's not just about the funding cuts. It's also about the current mayor's view of African culture, diversity, the LGBT movement. Our idea is to make the parade a way to reassert the city's own cultural values. So at a time when conservatism has somehow become a government plan, our parade intends to reaffirm that we are Carnival people, given to joy, given to freedom.
A few doors down in Beija-Flor Samba School, I meet artistic director Marcelo Misialidis. He's a bit more downbeat and the school's plot darker.
Ours is a tribute to the British writer Mary Shelley, who wrote Frankenstein. It's a work of universal value and allows us to reflect who's the creator and who's the creation, who's the monster these days. We're all responsible, especially when we say a politician is ambitious, corrupt, or a monster. After all, who puts those politicians in power? We, ordinary citizens, need to reflect on our behavior and our role in society.
There are 5 floats being prepared for Carnival here, and they're about 20 metres long and about 20 metres high. They're really impressive pieces of work, and the one in the middle is the most intriguing to me. It starts with the head of a rat, a big furry rat with his mouth wide open. Now, he represents the dirtiness of Brazil, the corruption and the problems of the country. And on his back are the buildings of Brasilia, and they represent the dirty politics of the country and the capital. And then further down the float is a big building, and that is the Petrobras building, the state oil company. Now, that's a company that's been mired in corruption scandals. It's actually been turned into a favela on the float, so you can see a little beauty salon in one of the windows. There's a little bar, there's also a little garage. So it's a corporate building that's been turned into a favela, which shows the divide in this country. 1.5 million tourists are expected for Carnival this year. It brings in more than $1 billion to the city. It's why journalist and cultural writer Aidano Andremota thinks the mayor's attitude towards Carnival is so misguided.
Without Carnival, there wouldn't be Rio de Janeiro as we know it. Samba schools are cultural institutions of absolute importance. Only the perverse logic of Brazilian society could devalue something as precious as samba schools. There's a slice of society that devalues Carnival because of a central issue in Brazil, racism. Carnival isn't a luxury. It is part of our society, part of what I call Rio's civilization.
It's certainly not a luxury for Flavia Jacobi, who's worked in the samba schools for 12 years. She still has her job, as do 7 other members of her family who work alongside her. But it's not easy.
Before, it was very crowded here. There were jobs for anyone who was interested. Today, we have to work for 2 or 3 schools because the money just isn't coming.
As one artistic director told me, Rio without Carnival is like Rio without the sun. The sun, though, is still shining, and the show goes on for now.
Katie Watson in Rio de Janeiro. You're listening to Global News, the most important stories and the best interviews and on-the-spot reporting from the BBC World Service. And here's some news about another BBC podcast.
A decade ago, one of the world's best-known politicians, Benazir Bhutto, was assassinated. I've been trying to find out what happened ever since. I'm Owen Bennett-Jones, and my new BBC World Service podcast is all about my 10-year investigation. It's called The Assassination. There are already 7 episodes for you to listen to, with more to come. Search for The Assassination wherever you get your podcasts.
Last year, the story of the nanny in China who was accused of setting fire to her employer's apartment, killing the mother and her 3 children, took Chinese social media by storm. The news story seemed to bring together a number of issues that are major talking points in contemporary Chinese culture: childcare, the gambling problem, and fire safety. And the case has once again been trending on Chinese social media after the nanny was sentenced to death by a court in Hangzhou. Carrie Allen, a Chinese media analyst from BBC Monitoring, has been following the story and told us more.
This was a huge case back in June last year, a massive fire outside of an apartment building in eastern Hangzhou in the city. What had happened is a mother and 3 children had been killed, and it involved the nanny, a woman called Mo Huanjing, who had gambling debts and decided that she wanted to start a fire and then stop it in order to try and get some compensation or some money from her employer. And obviously it went really badly wrong, and yes, she's been sentenced today.
And it sparked quite a debate, hasn't it, in China about middle-class families in China using domestic workers.
It has, yes. Not just middle-class families. There was a lot of debate last year about the screening process for domestic workers and people who work with children in general. There were a lot of cases last year where there were physical abuse cases to do with children in schools, where children were knocked about and they hadn't been screened. And it was the same with domestic workers, that there were these incidents like this. I mean, this case was absolutely huge in China. People knew it as the 22nd of June Nanny arson case, and that hashtag in itself became known. People are using that again today to talk about the case. But yeah, they've been saying that you really can't trust who's with your children, and there should be better government protection and screening processes involved so that these people that might be a potential risk can be identified.
She's been sentenced to death, and I know there have been millions of people commenting on Weibo and other social media sites about the case. How have they reacted to the sentence?
More or less unanimously. I remember back in June last year, people were saying that she needed to get the death penalty. They were saying she should get it. They were saying, how could you actually involve children in a fire? People today, the majority of comments are saying she got what she deserved. And gambling is actually, it's illegal in China. So the idea that she had massive gambling debts anyway was something that horrified people. But also there've been a lot of people talking about there should be better fire protection and fire safety in buildings. It's the case in China in a lot of places that buildings are just thrown up very, very quickly. And if you think about the UK case with Grenfell Tower in London and how much attention that got, this was more or less a similar case in China. There were a lot of people saying that buildings, there needs to be better insulation so that cases like this don't happen again.
Kerry Allen of BBC Monitoring. The demobilized Colombian left-wing rebel group FARC says it is suspending political campaigning for upcoming elections following threats to its candidates. FARC was allowed to start fielding candidates after signing a peace deal with the government in 2016, just months after voters had rejected such a deal by a slim margin. Protesters have violently disrupted a number of its rallies in recent weeks, while our America's editor Leonardo Rocha told me more about why the FARC politicians were concerned for their safety.
The main concern they have is with death threats, and the official government document says that more than 40 former rebels and their relatives have been killed in the past few months or since the FARC became a political party. But the party's president or leader, the presidential candidate, Rodrigo Londoño, known as Timochenko, he was attacked during rallies. There was a particular incident in Cali. Also, what the FARC has said in their statement is there are people publishing on Twitter, on Facebook, the addresses of these former FARC members, former rebel members, and giving them an address and encouraging violence. They are blaming center-right political party, the regional leaders, and they are threatening to sue them. But in the meantime, they're not taking part in the political campaign.
And why is there such strong opposition to them?
Well, it's more than 50 years of conflict, hundreds of people killed, many people killed by the FARC, and there's huge resentment. If you look online, if you look at the comments, people really resent, and many people who have been affected in some way by the FARC, they're not going to give up. They are preparing to attack or to verbally abuse them at least.
And what do they say they need to go back to campaigning?
They need reassurances. They need to get some security from the government. They are meeting the police on Monday, and I think they will restart the campaign. We have to bear in mind that it's Carnival now and nothing is happening in the next few days. So at least they put their concerns out there.
Leonardo Rocha. When it comes to action movies, Hollywood often relies on a muscly white man to save the world. But all that seems to be changing as Marvel's highly anticipated first black superhero film has hit the screens in the UK. Black Panther has already been released in the US, where critics raved about the comic adaptation, which has an almost entirely black cast, a black director, black producers, and black writers. Here's a clip from the trailer.
The world is changing. Soon there will only be the conquered.
Our arts correspondent Vincent Dowd went to the European premiere in London and joined me in the studio to tell us more.
So a huge amount of expectation for this film, the 18th film in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, films like Thor and the Avengers and so on. But Black Panther has a black African hero, or superhero, admittedly played by an American actor, Chadwick Boseman. It's not really the first black superhero. There were 3 Blade movies with Wesley Snipes years ago. This, though, is a huge mainstream movie with a budget of well over $200 million, a story basically set in Africa, admittedly a fictional African nation called Wakanda. The point very, very clearly made, Wakanda is a hugely prosperous nation, unknown somehow to the rest of the world. Looks like an African LA. And the rulers are not indebted in any sense to white people. Well, let's not get carried away. It's a superhero adventure with a plot designed for 13-year-old boys. Lots of explosions. But along the way, it does have points to make about imperialism and Western attitudes to Africa.
And what's been the reaction to the film?
Well, for once, let's hear from real people, not just from people online. I went, as you say, last night to the European premiere here in London. The atmosphere was electric. I asked people what they thought of Black Panther and the story it tells.
I was sat next to 2 white people and they absolutely loved it. They laugh at kind of the borderline, oh, are you pushing it? Are you not pushing it?
I think it's captured the spirit of us feeling confident in who we are as people of African descent, but actually inviting everyone to kind of celebrate who we are.
And Vincent, how radical is this for Marvel?
It is pretty radical. More importantly, it works. I think it's going to be a huge success, and I think we'll be seeing lots more of this down the years.
Our arts correspondent Vincent Dowd. With only a few days to go until Valentine's Day, a Bolivian frog is looking for a mate. But this search is particularly stressful for the Sehuenca's water frog, as he's believed to be the last of his kind. So he needs a partner to stop the species from dying out. To help him in his romantic quest, conservationists have come up with a unique strategy. The newsroom's Alice Porter has more.
The frog goes by the name of Romeo. He's 10 years old, and as Sehuenca water frogs don't often live beyond 15 years, the race is on to find him a partner. The frogs are only found in Bolivia, and Romeo currently lives in a tank in the Cochabamba Natural History Museum, where he doesn't have the opportunity to meet any eligible female frogs. The situation has become so drastic, thousands of dollars are needed to scour the country's rivers for signs of a female with whom a breeding program can be started. Arturo Munoz Saravia from the museum has been working to fund a trip on behalf of Romeo.
The frog is getting old, and some years ago he was calling a lot trying to find a female, but unfortunately he never found a female. This species lives in like a mountain cloud forest. It's very difficult to access, and you really need to organize expeditions. So the funds that we are going to get is going to be for that.
Arturo came up with a radical way of raising $15,000 for the trip. He set up a dating profile for Romeo on the dating website Match.com, where he's described Romeo as stocky, says he never smokes, drinks moderately, and is definitely interested in having children. Romeo appealed for a mate via video.
Hi there, I'm Romeo, a Sehuenca's water frog from Bolivia. I'm a pretty simple guy. I tend to keep to myself and love spending nights at home. I'm here to find my match, just like you. Except my situation's a bit more urgent. So if you believe in love and want to help an old frog out, please donate to my cause.
The deadline for donations is Valentine's Day, and with so much publicity for such a small frog, it's hoped that Romeo might finally find his Juliet.
Let's hope he does. Alice Porter there. And that's all from us for now, but an updated version of the Global News podcast will be available for you to download later. If you want to comment on this podcast or the topics covered in it, you can send us an email. The address is globalpodcast@bbc.co.uk. I'm Emilio San Pedro. Until next time, goodbye.